Rain was pounding on the windows when I received the call. The phone rang at 1:30 in the morning, a time when there could be no good news. Captain Reed's voice in the receiver was strained. "Maxfer, we have a homicide. Victim is male, 35 years old. But there's an oddity. A witness says she saw the killer, but only in a mirror." "A mirror?" "Well, that's something unusual." I got ready and 20 minutes later I was in front of the house. It was a 2-story mansion with ornate moldings, like something out of a postcard. It seemed to hold too many secrets. Inside, I was greeted by Liv, a young woman of about 28. She was sitting on the couch in the living room, her hands shaking and her eyes full of terror. A broken teacup lay beside her, clearly from a nervous breakdown. "Did you call the police?" I asked, sitting down next to her. She nodded. "I saw him," Liv began, her voice low as a whisper. "The killer was in the room, but I only saw him in the reflection." "In the mirror?" I clarified, trying not to betray my skepticism. "Yeah. I don't know how to explain it." Her story sounded strange, but the subtle details, like her confusion and nervousness, made me believe that she had indeed seen something frightening. We went up to the bedroom where the body lay. A man, 40 years old, wearing a strict suit. His eyes were open and his expression frozen with horror. The large wall mirror opposite the bed was cracked, as if someone had hit it with all their might. I took a look around the room. No sign of forced entry. All the doors and windows locked from the inside. But something made me linger my gaze on the mirror. "I wonder what you really saw, Liv?" I thought, realizing that this case was going to be a lot harder than it looked. Support me by subscribing to the channel if you want more detective stories. I'm doing this for you, and your support inspires me. Let me know what you think of the video in the comments. Your opinion is really important. The morning began with a tour of the crime scene. The room was frighteningly neat, everything looked like it had just been cleaned. Only the cracked mirror gave away that something terrible had happened here. "The doors and windows are locked," Reed told me as he entered the room. "No sign of forced entry." "What about the mirror?" I asked. "We checked it. There are prints on its surface," the captain said, pointing to a corner of the glass. "But the strange thing is that they are Liv's own prints." "The killer couldn't help but leave footprints," I muttered. "It's too clean a picture." I walked over to the table, where an unfinished glass of wine stood. There was an unfinished note lying beside it. Only 2 words were written on it: "She knows." "Do you think he was talking to Liv?" Reed asked, noticing my interest. "Maybe. Or maybe he was writing to someone else," I said, lifting my glass and sipping at its contents. Something didn't feel right. Liv's interrogation soon only confused the matter. "Did you see the killer?" I asked her. "Yes. But I can't describe his face," she replied. "How is that possible?" "I saw him in the mirror. There was a reflection, but it was my face." Her words made me think. It was either a metaphor or a sign of something more. While the CSIs were gathering evidence, I decided to dig deeper into Liv's past. There are witnesses who too easily find themselves at the center of events. Turns out Liv was already involved in a scandal 2 years ago. She was accused of assaulting a neighbor, but the case was dismissed for lack of evidence. "She's hiding something," Reed said when I shared the information. "It's possible. But if she is, we need to figure out why she's here now," I replied. Everything pointed to the mirror being the key. But to what? Back in the room, I stopped again at the cracked mirror. At first glance, It was just an ordinary mirror, but for some reason it caught my eye. Each crack seemed to have been drawn deliberately, not the result of an accidental blow. "What do you think, Maxfer?" Captain Reed asked, standing behind me. "That mirror is not a random detail. Perhaps it's the key to the whole case," I replied, running my finger along one of the cracks. "It's like it's telling a story." I had forensics check the mirror for hidden records or traces. It took a few hours, but their finding was startling. They discovered a hidden inscription on the back of the mirror that could only be seen under ultraviolet light. "You can only see me here." That cryptic phrase sent a chill down my spine. What did she mean? "Maybe it's a warning?" Reed suggested. "Or a challenge," I replied, feeling the matter start to turn in an even weirder direction. Meanwhile, I received a report that Liv's fingerprints were found not only on the mirror, but also on the note that read, "She knows." "Do you know what that means?" I asked Liv when we met again. Her face turned pale. "No. I didn't write it," she replied, but her gaze avoided mine. Liv was beginning to lose her temper. She had agreed to meet me, but her nervousness was evident from the first minutes. "Tell me about your past life," I asked. "I know this isn't the first time you've found yourself at the center of such events." She was silent for a few seconds, then said quietly, "This has nothing to do with the past. I don't know why it happened, but I feel like the whole thing, like it's haunting me." Her words made me wonder. Could someone be playing with her mind? Or does she not realize what she's doing? Meanwhile, I learned another detail. The mansion where the murder took place belonged to Liv's family, but she sold it 5 years ago. Yet, by a strange coincidence, it's now where the tragedy happened. "This is all getting too personal," Reed said when I shared this discovery. "I agree. But we still don't know who's pulling the strings," I said. I decided to talk to my neighbors to see if they had seen anything unusual. One of them said that on the night of the murder he saw Liv enter the house earlier than she claimed. "She's lying," I muttered quietly. After the new facts, I decided to meet with Liv one last time. Her version of events was starting to come apart at the seams. "Liv, you say you saw the killer in the mirror. But then why are your fingerprints everywhere?" I asked, trying to hold her gaze. She sighed nervously. "I don't know how to explain it," she whispered. "It wasn't me. I saw someone else." "Liv, the mirror couldn't lie. What are you really hiding?" I insisted. Her face contorted with horror. "Sometimes I feel like I don't know who I am," she said. "It's like someone else is looking back at me from a mirror." Her words sounded like nonsense, but there was a logic to them. Maybe she had a split personality, or maybe she was deliberately confusing me to distract me from something important. At that moment, Captain Reed informed me that they had found another inscription in the mirror that had been overlooked. It read, "You will never know the truth." Sensing that the clue was close at hand, I knew that I had to uncover the darkest reflection of the case. I spent the night going over everything we'd learned, the prints, the writing on the mirror, Liv's connection to this house. But one detail kept me on my toes. The "you only see me here" inscription and Liv's words about seeing her reflection instead of the killer's face. I thought of a possible split personality theory and decided to get a psychologist involved. Liv agreed to be interviewed, although she looked like a person who was ready to run away at any moment. The psychologist confirmed my suspicions. Liv could be suffering from dissociative disorder. She could have been both a witness and a perpetrator without realizing it. She could have acted out of passion, the psychologist explained. That explained a lot, but it didn't answer the main question: Who had left the note, and why was the mirror at the center of this drama? I went back into the house and looked around the room again. The scratches on the floor next to the mirror caught my attention. It had clearly been moved, and for good reason. Behind the mirror, I found a small stash that held an old photograph. It was of Liv, her family, and a man whose face was scrawled in ink. Underneath the photo was the caption, "He's always watching." Liv cried when I showed her the picture. "That's my father," she whispered. "He was a terrible man. We sold the house after he disappeared." Disappeared? Or did he disappear? I asked. She didn't answer, but her look said it all. It explained a lot, Liv's fears, her connection to this house. But there was still one question: what did the victim have to do with all this? I remembered that the victim was the lawyer who handled the sale of the house. Maybe he knew more than he should have. Maybe he was blackmailing Liv. "Maxfer, we have the test results," Reed broke in. "The note that says she knows has traces of ink that match her fingerprints." So she wrote that note, but why? I wondered. And that's when it all made sense. It wasn't a murder, it was an act of desperation. Liv was trying to escape the past, but her own fears, her own reflection led her to believe that what she saw was not herself, but the killer. The ending turned out to be frighteningly simple. Liv is the only perpetrator and the only witness. Her reflection in the mirror is not the killer. It's her. The case was closed, but I was left with the feeling that the shadows of this house's past would never fade. Did you like the story? Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new investigations. I'm always putting in the effort for you, and your support means a lot. Leave a comment, I'd love to hear your thoughts.